Is it okay? C'est bon?
I think it is.
Okay, thank you very much. Only one word. So, je suis Abbas Zouache, I'm Dr. Abbas Zouache, Director of Study of the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology, the IFAO. And I'm only here to say thank you, to welcome you, because it is the first session of the seminar conversation about nomadism. And I'm very happy to launch not only this seminar, but also the new project about on nomadism, which is under the direction, the responsibility of Maëlle Crépy from IFAO, Julian Cooper, and Marie Bourgeois. So thank you very much for your work, and I'm very happy to welcome you for this new session, new seminar, and the first session of this seminar. It's okay, Maëlle, you can start the seminar.
Okay, thank you very much, Abbas. So first, Marie Bourgeois, who is one of the co-director of the project, will tell you a few words about it.
Thank you very much, Abbas Zouache and Maëlle. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you all for joining us today for this first seminar of conversation about nomadism. So, few words about the project. In the past few years, nomadic studies are experiencing a strong revival and development. New data is becoming available, coming from a wide range of disciplines and sources. However, the study of nomadic societies faces many constraints and still has few gaps. So our desire to create this project is based on several observations made over the last few years, both on the field or during conversation discussion. For example, after international events focusing on the subject, such as the What Does It Mean to Be a Nomad conference held in Paris 2 years ago, or the Nomadland conference in Lyon last year, it became clear, without surprise, that nomadism covers many aspects and realities, but it is impossible to approach and structure our data and knowledge on the subject without interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary approaches, and without covering wide chronological and geographical areas. So through a series of 3 seminars and 1 workshop a year, we aim to bring together data and researchers from archaeology, history, geography, geoarchaeology, philology, anthropology, and more, in order to avoid pitfalls and in the study and discussion about nomadic societies. So to know the relative lack of archaeological data and the scarcity of textual sources from nomadic societies, with bias induced by mostly external sources. Research on nomadism has made significant progress over the last few years through regional scaled projects, for example, such as the Eastern Marmarica surveys directed by Anna Katarina, the ERC Desert Networks led by Bérengère Redon, the Aswa-Kamambo Archaeological Project, led by Maria Carmela Gatto, Antonio Curci, the Adbai Survey Project, led by Julian Cooper, to mention just a few. And at the same time, some inside fieldworks are also led to important discoveries regarding nomadic societies or individuals. For example, in the Cher Muftar camp excavated by Clara Hoyte in Balat, or through the finding of the Mafdo in Bir Samut. However, it appears that nomads are rarely the center of research projects or field operation, although many missions come across nomadic remains in the margin or even inside of the site. So nomads are everywhere in Egypt, Sudan, Libya, but when we are not specifically looking for them, they are very easy to miss. Archaeological documentation on the nomad is therefore incomplete due to a probable bias in surveys and excavation. It is thus very important to carry out meticulous excavation and studies on the scale of each site, focusing on nomadic remains. And today, Clara Yoite is going to talk about settlement archaeology through the site of Sher Muftar. And in order to understand these societies, their evolution, their traveling movement, the way in which they exploit their environment, in order to understand their full complexity, it's necessary to work specifically on the subject and on a wider scale. Anna Katariga is going to talk about this aspect of nomadic studies by addressing mobile practices and spatial organization at the scale of the region of the Eastern Marmarica. So that's also what we want to do with this project for the Eastern Sahara and in diachrony, but by contributing to structure the research on nomadism, offering a recurring discussion space thanks to the webinar and organizing surveys and field work focusing specifically on this society. So we are very happy to welcome you to this first seminar, and we would like to thank the IFAO for its support and trust. Thank you very much, and Juliane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie. And again, I want to say thank you to the IFAO for hosting us. Nomads is not always welcome everywhere, but we're very glad we're welcome here. It is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker of the first session, Anna Katharina Rieger. Dr. Rieger was trained as a classical archaeologist at Bonn and LMU Munich and has worked on a huge number of projects all over the East Mediterranean, from Austria in Italy to Jordan, Galilee, and the Libyan Marmarica Desert of Egypt. Her publications vary widely on many topics, from pottery, workshops, economics, landscape archaeology, arid lands, lived religion, just to name a few. Being a session on nomads, of course, it is Dr. Rieger's interest in arid lands and nomadism that brings us to the event today. She has directed a project in the Marmarica Desert. This is the classical name for the Egyptian Libyan Desert. And this project's results, at least I think, have produced and transformed our knowledge of nomadism in this part of the world. This desert was sometimes even thought to be uninhabited, and this project has really changed our view of this part of the world. Her talk is called Just Follow the Water, Mobile People and Mobile Spaces in the Eastern Marmarica, Northwest Egypt, between 1500 BC and 700 CE. Dr. Rieger, whenever you want to share your screen and begin, you may do so. You have approximately 35 minutes.
Okay, does it work for you? Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not in the, yeah, perfect. It's perfect.
Okay, good. So let's see, I can move. Okay. Yeah, so I can't see now any watch, but you tell me if I'm too long. Thank you so much to be the first in the first seminar on nomads. So I appreciate, of course, very much your initiative. I thank you for inviting me, for giving me the opportunity to once again speak about the Marmarica. So for me, I can always speak about it, but many of you will already have heard about it. But I tried to focus on what you gave as a title to this first seminar on the spatial organization and semi-nomadism. So it will be maybe more on mobility than on space, but of course it's closely related. Yeah, it's a very simple outline. The title is Just Follow the Water, Mobile People and Mobile Spaces in the Eastern Marmarica. And my outline will be along, the ecology, how ecology, marginality, and mobility are related, about the evidence, which of course will be the longest part, evidence on mobility and human activity in this area of the Eastern Marmarica, and some concepts, the practices of mobility, people, and so mobile people and mobile spaces. So where we are is the Eastern Marmarica, west of the Nile, but east of the Cyrenaica, northeastern Africa. You see here oh, one moment, I will have my pointer. Can you see my pointer?
Yeah, we can.
So the red circle is of course clear. So this was the area we worked in. We started there in a project on life strategies, which was fully named sedentarism and nomadism, and a huge collaborative research project. And we were, focused on this kind of relation between sedentary and nomadic life strategies, which soon turned out to be, you know, a little too black and white, let's say. The physical geography, the climate there is dry. So this is why ecology is important, because it creates a marginal position, an ecologically marginal position. It's a steppe zone and desert. So this is, you know, nothing new for people working in Egypt. And the time, because it was a landscape and geoarchaeological project, the time frame was, of course, not clear from the beginning. You know, of course, there is Roman residues from the city of Paraetonion, Massa Matruh, but we did not know, you know, how far down in the chronology or how far up in the chronology this reaches. So what we cover with the evidence we see is late Bronze Age to, let's say, early Islamic or late Byzantine, early Byzantine times. I you know, put in here the water, the little rainfall we have here. Siwa receives 8 millimeter seasonal rainfall, and Massa Matruh still 140, 150. Just to give you an impression, again, you know, for you traveling and working there, not a new thing. From south to north, we have, of course, a full desert. We see this kind of more steppe vegetation, all on this kind of very flat Marmarican limestone plateau, at least scattered bushes, which are the vegetation we can find in the more kind of central part or northern parts of the Marmarica plateau. And in the north, we have almost Mediterranean climate, and a certain options to grow crops and trees. It is all about this arid ecology, this arid environment, and aridity is, of course, not only no water, but also a high temperature. We have this desert conditions, steppe and desert conditions there. And just to raise these issues, it's scarce resources, but not only water, also soil. It leads to adapted life strategies because people had to find or have to find things to live on. It leads to a niche exploitation, so it's not a densely populated, overcrowded area because of the scarcity of resources. And this leads to space-intense, what I would call space-intense life strategies. So areas you have to cover have to be big because it's only little water, it's only little soil, so you have to think big or large. And this, of course, implies also mobility. So to cover large spaces, you need to be mobile. And you know what ways of mobility there are, we will see in the following slides. A brief word to the paleoclimate, because what I showed you now is, of course, you know, the present day state there. And of course, all of you are familiar with this, the aridification of the Sahara. So we have from 5000 BCE to present an aridification. So you see less green and more gray, let's say. And this strip up here where we are located with the Eastern Marmarica still receives, of course, even today or around like in the second millennium BCE, rainfalls up to 150 millimeters per year. But this is little, and on the plateau, it is even less, as I showed you. And it's very variable. So this is also something very important for arid, or very crucial for arid regions. Precipitations are highly variable. So what makes the difference then if you have so little rainfall? It's the micro region. So how an area here in a strip from like 100 kilometers east-west and 100 kilometers south-north extension, how the relief, first of all, is looking like. So we have the Marmarica plateau, as I told you, which steps down in at least 1 2 kind of escarpments, but it's very flat, so it's only like 1 to 2% of inclination, and which is important is here this escarpment where the wadis are incised. So this is the drainage system down to the Mediterranean Sea, which makes things different in terms of the availability of water. Again, on the water, you know, what I show you here is a cut through the plateau from south to north. Here we have the Mediterranean Sea, and the blue arrows are, you know, the overland flow. So the little precipitations which are accumulating, flowing down, and on their way infiltrating into the little soil which is there. And of course, as you know from the desert environment, if there is any depression, soon there's soil, soon there's water, soon there's plant vegetation. So this is you know, how this system works on the plateau. And here in the north, where the wadi incisions are, of course, accumulation of water is still more frequent and more consistent. So what now I'm coming to the evidence we have in this region. As Marie said in the beginning, of course, archaeology has a problem because nomads are more often not so numerous. Things they are carrying with them are not, you know, so many. So, and they cover vast areas. So how to spot them and what to find, what to expect. And I think there, of course, we have to think a little different. And, you know, we know from the Eastern Desert, there is the Eastern Desert where so pottery is possible also for nomads. And of course, they leave traces. So for this, we are here. But since I now, you know, started with the water and just follow the water, and it was also very important for us to cover the entire area, we started to look for the cisterns, which are crucial whenever you move or are on the Marmarica Plateau. So here we have the Katara Depression. So I'm speaking about this area, and we started with the historic cartography. So yeah, starting from the survey of Egypt in the end of the 19th century. Here now we used American maps where you see all the Bir marked on the map, all the depressions, Zepcars. And so we started to mark them, to survey them, to see in how far they are, also ancient ones. What of course is not astonishing is that the number of cisterns, which is the black dots, is decreasing, like down to 100, 200 kilometers south on the plateau, according to the seasonal rainfall. But we have a high density in the north, which is also due to the kind of modern ones which are built there. But what we were interested in starts like 20 to 30 kilometers south of the coast into the plateau, to know what of these, or which of these cisterns were also used in antiquity. This is of course much about depressions where people started to build cisterns, which you can't see by your own eye, but of course then are visible through vegetation, which you see down there, for example. And how water was collected and like guided to the cisterns, to the cavities, was partly really very kind of solid structures. Here we have at the Bahr el Kenays a double-layered ashlars row or bund, which then like channeled the water to the cavity of the cistern. And here, the person walking along this channeling bund, which is, kind of only a row of stone, but still sufficient for stopping the water and directing it to the cistern. So this is how the water was collected, how water harvesting was done. And the Bahr el Kenays, which is located here, 50 kilometers south of the coast, was a place we studied more intensively. So you see here the channeling bund, one of the spoil heaps, like the cleaning of the cistern. And this place consists of 2 cisterns and 2 of those heaps, of which one we excavated. So it's both remains of a building, which then, turned out to be a rest station of Roman, a rest house of Roman times. The position of this depression and the cisterns is, highly infrastructurally important. It's a pass between like two ridges of the escarpment. Also, the modern road leading to Siva is crossing here, and so this was already in antiquity a point of where to get water for those moving across the vast plateau. And here is the map, how it is looking like here at Abarcanes, the two heaps with the buildings, but of course also many other structures, if you wish, shelters and campsites, accumulation of stones, which we were not able to date, unfortunately. And I think Carla will show us more about things like this, which then are datable. But what, the entire place tells us is that it was used for a long, long time. So we had this arrowhead, which is at least pre-dynastic. It's a surface find. We cannot be sure, but Cologne colleagues dated it for us, like from the form and the serrated edges. We have these shelters which are undatable. We made cuts and trenches, but there's no material to date. And here you see, from stone tools to Roman pottery, World War II remains, to modern plastic. So everything is there. So this was a place frequented for a long, long time. The building in the northwestern heap turned out to be a well-built, 2-story high kind of installation. Material we found there is mostly pottery, Roman pottery, amphoras, transport vessels, but also terra sigillata from the 3rd century CE to the 6th century CE. So this was a well-equipped rest house on, for those passing by or roaming on the plateau. Other cistern sites are looking like this. So this was Bir el Nus, 150 kilometers south of the coast, which is only a depression with like scatters of stones and pottery, or also cans from the Second World War. So this is also evidence we have, and which tells us this was used in Roman times. And another very, more interesting one, because it's Abu Mukayyad, which consists of 2 large depressions and a cistern like a kilometer to the east, where we had hundreds of pottery scatters, fireplaces. Here you see the filled cistern. So it's a place here on the Marmarica plateau, which gave, the opportunity for those grazing their animals in the depressions, or crossing from coast to Siva or vice versa, to give them a place to rest and to stay. Okay, from those dots in the landscape, which are the water supply points, you can of course reconstruct the routes, or the network of routes stretching across the Marmarica plateau. So this is how a route trek is looking like today, or how people use it, one of the cisterns today. And we were able to reconstruct this route system as it looks here. Those solid lines are like the proper ancient ones, and the others where we can only infer from other cartographic and so on evidence that they are ancient routes. So this shows you how large the space people covered. So the material we find up here and down, maybe Siva we do not know, but at least at the cistern sites is like the locally produced pottery and imported pottery and goods. So this is what people used and covered. But of course, we do not know exactly, or we have to know, or we were interested in, what they made the living on, what they traded, what the goods were, and that's why I changed. I changed the map here. These blue dots are again our cistern sites, and all the other dots are settlements or pottery production sites from Greco-Roman times. And there, what will follow now, if I can. Now I have a problem, and I can't change my image any longer.
It seems to be stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can just escape the...
Yes.
Yeah,
one moment, I start again.
Yeah.
Let's see, I start fully. Sorry.
No problem at all.
Don't do so. Okay, let's see. Okay, I can move on. Okay,
perfect.
Let's move to the northern parts of the area with all these dots. Green is Roman, pink is Ptolemaic, and we made a differentiation according to what we see or what we saw there, based on the frequency of utilization of the site. So there are one-time used spots only, which are very rarely, but we have them, just a broken pot, a fireplace. We currently used places which are settlements, fields, production sites, continuously used places which are cisterns, like here, for example, or here. As I showed you, a balconies used for millennia, and periodically used sites which are more difficult to trace, which could be, for example, places like mosques, graves, or so on. So this is a classification of these surface finds we could make because, or we were also interested in making because this allows us for, not focusing only, this is a field, there's a farmstead, this is a sedentary lifestyle, but to look for utilization of a very, difficult area. So fragmentation or frequency of utilization helps us to change our perspective and to look differently on the traces we have. What was most important finally, and I will show also pottery, but what was most important is agricultural production sites, so which also are covering the again the second millennium, from the second millennium to the 4th century CE, so from Bronze Age to Roman times. These are field installations which appear like this on the flat plateau, or in the satellite image like this, just a kind of embanked field. And here in the Wadi, we studied more closely, Wadi al-Stan. You see here again the kind of embankment. It's very flat terraces these fields are made of, and installations to let water in. And another way of, and these are all these checkered areas. These are fields, from Greco-Roman times related to those settlements. Another way of making use of the area and, increasing water and soil availability are dams, like cross-wadi dams or lateral dams, which, altogether give or establish a system of terracing, lateral, terracing, cross-sectional, and these fields on top of the tableland. So people, I don't know now the numbers, but made use of this very arid region through this simple but very, space covering ways of building fieldstone walls. And this is a chart, just showing you how to increase root available water for growing crops. So if you have 100 or 125 millimeters of precipitation, but this accumulates because you are directing it down into the body, you can easily have like 250 up to 300, which already would be enough for tree cultivation as we have it today, and as people also in antiquity did it. I will show it to you soon. So the settlements I showed you here are the triangles. This is one of the settlements. This is the field installation here, the body, but it's a big one. Here you have a smaller one. So these settlements were scattered like along the body system. And I think I have a map, of, surveyed and non-surveyed settlements. I can't tell you the numbers, but they are frequent. So up there in the north, in Greco-Roman times, you could speak about a sedentary population, but I think, I will kind of summarize it in the end, that this is all a question of what to base mostly you're living on and how to be flexible in a very difficult environment. I said, this is Greco-Roman. From the pottery in the settlements, it is 2nd BCE to 4th, 5th CE, some small scatters of later ones. But we dated also like the soil layers and have various spots where we can trace back to the 2nd millennium BCE, at least, those field installations. So we have, parallel to the Ramesside 4 in El Racham, we had someone living on the plateau and in the wadi systems, growing crops, barley in this case on the plateau. I think I skipped this on the wine. These are archaeobotanical remains showing us that barley was grown, wheat was grown to a very small extent, figs were grown, and most was wine. This is also paralleled to the only more or less emic source, if you will, a papyrus from a region a little further west. So this is what people growed as cultivated as crops. But of course, as I told you, in this arid environment, you have to be flexible. Precipitations are varying, so they based their living not only on crops but on mostly goat and sheep breeding. This is the comparison of 3 sites. 2 in the north, and 1 is Abal Kenais, where you see that in all places, sheep and goat are the most frequent bones. Then transport animals or draught animals, donkey and camel. And at Abal Kenais, which is the orange, you have always, the most variety of animal bones, which tells us that, of course, it's wild animals, it's the transported goods. So we have fish there on the plateau, which was like in the, it might be garum or other ways of food preservation. We have fish and we have those small ruminants as the best animal to base the livelihood on. I think I skip, what I have on the pottery, which is a very Roman, huge production of transport amphora, which is show us that we had that there was a surplus economy. The exploitation of this area was, so big that people could grow a surplus. So against the assumption that arid environments are, only used by nomads and allow only for mobile lifestyles and are only self-sufficient people is not true. You can enhance the options of growing, producing agricultural products and have a surplus economy. What I will show you briefly before I come to an end is there's not only wheel-made pottery, the normal transport amphora, but there is a handmade pottery which can be found, at the cistern sites I showed you, but also in the settlements, which is a pottery made on spot in updraught kilns. It's not wheel-made. It's a very it's a shell-tempered, very rough fabric. And has very many closed forms, which were used for cooking. So this is for example, at the Balkanaes, where we have the well-made rest house for traders who carry terra sigillata with them, we have on the same spot this pottery made on the spot, which of course is a different practice, which does not mean it's different people, but it's different practice because they maybe had a camp there where they were their animals, and others were just merchants traveling and passing by. So in the pottery, we see also the differences of making use of the area. If I, sum this up, what I have said about the ecology, these various like zones or options to use it, the decreasing water availability, and what we know or saw about producing goods. I made this map, which shows that livestock breeding and agriculture is possible in the north. Livestock breeding is still possible in the northern parts of the plateau, and trade is of course crossing all these kind of zones. And I call this, what we have with the livestock breeding is a roaming mobility. These are people covering large spaces. If we speak about trade, which was, for many reasons also done by people who knew the area very well, is a site-directed mobility. So this is something where you spot to a certain point and head to Siva, for example, or to the coast. I think, maybe I go to this slide, which, is just exemplifying what I said about the roaming mobility, which is, has a focus on the area, and the site-directed mobility, which has a focus on place and might be also covering longer stretches due to the trade interest. And if I go briefly back, this brings me to what Marie said also in the beginning. So nomadic studies are gain more interest, which is important. But I think still, when I started, which is a time ago, but it is still a static category. And we see here the nomad, there the state, there the pastoralist. We look at it with a very modern background about identity, nation, economy, borders, and we are very, many of us are more urban researchers, urban-based researchers, and we see it's still a little too undercomplex. So it's either the one or the other. It's black or white. And we are reifying many things. So as we started also, it was the sedentary options in the north and the nomadic, roaming on the plateau, which is, there is no trace of actually this. Of course, we cannot say who was this person carrying a vessel to Siva and who was the person roaming with the sheep. But looking at the resources and the necessity of being flexible, it is an opportunistic agriculture, and people had also to rely on their livestock. So it was always both, yeah. And so there's not the nomadic community which is subsistent and the sedentary which is producing surplus. I think this became clear from what the Eastern Marmarica offered us as a evidence. I could say some words about nomads in literature. It depends on.
Go for it.
Okay, good. No, because of course, I think everybody of us now gathered here is thinking about nomadism in anthropology, in archaeology, in history, and read, for example, Roten on the dimorphic society, on the enclosed nomadism, which was so much on the interaction, but of course, a kind of hierarchy. Then, of course, Anatoly Khazanov, who came from a more Marxist background, looking for dependencies and always seeing the outside world. So there is a nucleus of a nomadic world and then the outside. So, and he was thinking in very, in dependencies. Self-sufficiency is not possible, but, for what group, social cultural group, self-sufficiency is possible. No one can live without the others. And then, of course, Roger Cribb is still crucial, I think, for everybody of us, looking at the real kind of evidence or traces nomads leave. And he started to see the various degrees of mobility. So I think he's still extremely useful and helpful. But then, what I, based my reasoning on is Barnard and Wendrich, Archaeology of Mobility, who see mobility as practice. And this is, again, like the stepping behind giving labels to nomads and sedentary people. It's seeing mobility as a basic human practice. So it's only a degree of, how far you go, how often you go. And this is what we, did with the frequency and the kind of, looking at the distances or looking at, what pottery is used. So this is various degrees or grades of mobility. Okay, this I skipped. This is, what is done in recent times. It's a very romantic and modern look at our perspective on nomadism, which means always freedom, which also might influence, how we are influenced by this, what the modern discourse is talking about. But what I found also very useful, because we are archaeologists and we are always, our objects, our evidence has a place. So it's always located. So if we think more about place, and this, is labeled the mobile space paradigm. You could also call it mobile place paradigm. This is here Scheller and Uri in the last quote, and Denis Retailleer, who studied the Sahel zone, an anthropologist who really, tries to think differently and not to come from a sedentary, urban, place-based, central place-based perspective, saying that places are mobile, short-lived, ephemeral, and fugitive. They reappear, so they disappear and reappear. And movement is their first quality. And, he bases it on an example of a marketplace in Mali, Niger, I don't know, which is, the most important place in the region, but it's not there. No one is living there. It appears when there's market and it disappears, but all people know about it. So, and this, is another thing, Edward Casey, who is a philosopher, saying that place is an event and not a thing. Places are, like created, produced just by the practice happening there. Like, for example, having a campsite and using this handmade pottery. It's an event, and this is like unique, and it can again disappear. So this helps us to not to give too much importance on a place, but always like to depart from the place to the larger space and to those movements people do in the large space. Scheller and Uri, I skip this and, just maybe show you this as my final slide, again, bringing you back to the Eastern Marmarica, where I think, this, and what I put on top of it is mobilities have always involved expert systems. So what I told you about the water, the difficulties to know where it is, to gather it, to harvest it. So living in this arid environment, of course, implies much knowledge, local knowledge, and to being mobile there is also a very, it's an expert system. So this implies that it's not too much a differentiated world. And it's not, because the question is always, were it Romans living there? And I would always say, no, it's someone who really, knows to make use of this area, to make use of these large spaces, which were all depends on the knowledge of where to find water. So their practices and their spaces are very intertwined. I stop here. I thank you, and I'm of course open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that talk, and I think you ended on a high note, so I'm very glad that you were able to talk about those theoretical aspects. Just for everyone in the room, we have approximately 10 minutes of question time. You can ask in the chat box or you can ask via audio. As the adjudicator of all this, I will be selfish and ask the first question. And my question is regarding the sort of chronological profiles of the livestock that you found. Do you see a sort of a change in less cattle or more goat and sheep and things like this? And I'm particularly interested when you see the first camel and what sort of curve you would see in the sites, if you have the ability to say that in the chronological setting.
Of course, the first camel is always interesting. So we do not see really, you know, since it's abial-kinase. Sorry, it's always my video self doing things. It's abial-kinase, which, you know, starts in the 3rd century CE. So no earlier findings. And we have a camel bone in Ashtan, which is again, it might be 2nd century CE. So these are the earliest, so we cannot kind of overwhelm any other thoughts about canal domestication. And we do not see, since this is the most bones are coming from Ashtan and abial-kinase. So these are 2 centuries, 4 centuries. So there's not a real, we can't see very many changes, let's say. In these centuries, because it's then, you know, one context and a second, and it's those bones, and they are related to the pottery finds, which are also, you know, many are 2nd, 4th century, but no really like peaks or developments.
Just a reminder to everyone, you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question via audio or in the chat box.
There is a question in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, since you pointed out the 2nd millennium, how on what grounds you have based it, and could you specify in which period of the 2nd millennium you are? Thank you.
So these are dated soil layers in these tableland fields, so in these agricultural installations, and we have a date, you know, but they have a longer kind of arrow stretch, let's say. So we are one date is also even the 3rd millennium BCE, but with a margin of, you know, 300 years, which is then 2200 to 1900. And another one is, I think, 1600 to 1400. So we are in these ranges of 200 years, but it's OSL dated soil layers. And we have at least, you know, I think three of these agricultural installations which date to the 2nd millennium BCE. No material evidence. I'm sorry, nothing else.
We have another question in the room.
Hello, thank you so much for your very informative presentation. It's more of a comment, not a direct question. I was very inspired when you showed the quote about a place is more an event, because in my PhD thesis I studied open spaces in settlements, and it was always a challenge to when we want to define marketplaces, other places where people gathered for different reasons, festivals or processions or things like that. So I was a bit against the idea of defining a specific place to say this is the marketplace, or this is the place for festival, or this has to be the place, fixed place of procession. Actually, we don't have any evidence about this. What we have are just suggestions based on very different material or evidence. So I think that archaeologists, especially working on settlements inside the borders of defined settlements a bit away from the desert, I think they need to look at your how you process your material to be more inspired. So I thank you for the inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just an anecdote. So since I do also Roman religion, so it helps so much to think differently about space. And of course, we have over the discussion of public, private, on, you know, giving functions. We label rooms, and we need to, because of course we want to know what happened there. But it's kind of a problem of describing, of wording. How do we deal with this kind of multifunctional changing functions? So we, as, you know, very located archaeologists, have always to think more about timeframes, frequencies, and so on. So that's why, yeah, event, frequency, temporality, seasonality, all this is also for settlements. It's a good way of thinking. So it helps me also very much for other things. Thank you.
We have time for a few more questions. So if there's no one else, I'll ask one.
I have one question. In one of the long-lived research program of the Maison de l'Orient et de la Méditerranée, which is about the arid margin of Syria, they had the same kind of agricultural area using qanats, and then the pioneer firms, which are on the desertic margin, and then the nomadic area with systems. And in this project, they think that the systems are made by sedentary power to improve the production of nomadic society. Do you think that you have the same kind of thing in Marmarica, or that the systems are built by the nomads themselves or by the sedentary people along the trade road and used then by the pastoralists? What do you think about that?
A very good question. Thank you. So both, I think. No, because Abba el-Kanais, which I showed, you know, where we excavated also the building, is one of those examples which, you know, for sure was used, already existing before Romans came. And of course, you know, what is comparable to Syria, there is an increase of exploitation. There is, of course, you know, this kind of infrastructure along the routes was highly well equipped then, but the system as such was already there. And of course, you know, then maintenance and so on was, you know, maybe shifting more to a central power, or to some people, you know, having a collegium also in Massa Matruh and making being in economic relations with Alexandria. It might be. We have much less, as I would say, much less evidence in the Marmarica in comparison to Syria, where we can see, you know, how you know, the more fertile western areas are expanding. So it's there in the Marmarica, and the Abba el-Kanais would be one example, but and there might be cisterns, you know, which are basically only dug in Roman times, but you know, it's by exclusion. So if we have no earlier traces, it could be a Roman one, and there might be some more which are only Roman because they enlarged the network. Yeah, good, but it's a good comparison. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think that's probably all we have time for in questions. But I'll pass on to Marie. She has a question.
If I can. Did you find some equivalent of some proof of surplus economy production, but for more ancient time, like, I don't know, kind of storage pit, something like that? No.
Nothing. So unfortunately, all what we have about, you know, a large scale production, it's proper, you know, late Ptolemaic or 2nd century BCE, and then Roman. So there's nothing, and this is only like based on the amphora production. So there's nothing about, you know, storing grain or something we could not find. So it's all very trade based, I think. And, you know, for the earlier times, you know, so the question about, you know, we would like to know more about the 2nd millennium BCE. We have many agricultural installations from the like first half of the 1st millennium BCE, but we have not the settlements, no traces of, you know, other things people used.
Okay.
Not yet, maybe.
Not yet.
I think every Egyptologist wants you to find the Libyans of the Ramesside War.
Yes, yes, I would like, you know, but at least I would always say we have so many microlithic artifacts, surface finds, we cannot date them, but there's much going on, you know, which is not Roman, not pottery, and yeah, we could continue and find the Libyans from the Ramesside War.
Inshallah. I think with that, we should probably pass on to our next speaker, but I just want to let everyone know there is an opportunity to ask both speakers some questions right at the end.
Can I just briefly interrupt in case I'm just unpolitely disappearing at 3? I'm apologizing because I have another seminar just to say, but I'm here until 3.
You did remind us.
Yeah.
I'll now pass on to Maël to introduce the next speaker.
So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Katarina, for your talk. So we will also welcome Clara Joite. She is Senior Research Fellow at the DAI Cairo, Director of the project Buto Settlement Studies, and in charge of the scientific management of the DAI Cairo Archive and Library. She is a settlement archaeologist with a particular interest in oasis and desert region of Egypt. Our focus is on the micro-regional development and entanglement of different population groups in Darla Oasis, where she started to work in 2008. In 2021, she published at the IFAO Press a monograph entitled Balat 12, the Shir Muftar site. Today, she will talk about her work about the Shir Muftar in Balat, and more specifically about the everyday life and spatial organization inside a large camp during the 3rd millennium BC. From the medical study and documentation of an exceptionally preserved stratigraphy. So thank you very much, Clara, for agreeing to give this talk today and to be part of the first session of the seminar conversation about nomadism. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maël, for this. And thank you for the invitation. I'm not extremely happy to speak also about nomadism and oasis, but I'm also very happy to do it here in this room. And besides, it was an IFAO project a long time ago. It's the first time actually I speak in this room about Sheikh Muftar, so it's a special pleasure for me.
And it's a special pleasure for us also.
So as I just said, it was an IFAO project which started 2013, 2014. It was many people to thank for, which I just listed, not to read them all of here. By now it's also linked with the DAE research and also part of the TANA African network. Okay. So, okay, here's the mouse, great. So we are in the Eastern Sahara, which is called in Egypt the Western Desert or the Libyan Desert, and we're in the southern part here around Dakhla Oasis and Khaga Oasis, where the ceramic has been found in around 100 find spots, especially in Dakhla Oasis since, let's say, the mid-80s or something like this. The ceramic is very easy to recognize. Even a non-ceramic person like me will recognize it at once. So it's reasonably sure we know roughly the distribution. Also, some sherds have been found in Farafra Oasis, and there might be also cross-references with Bahariya Oasis. There are no finds, however, in the Nile Valley. There are two little bowls mentioned for Abydos, which might be Sheikh Muftar, but might be only just the same fabric. Very clear. So Sheikh Muftar is a pure desert or rather oasis population. It dates to the 4th and 3rd millennium. So it's in large part contemporary with the early dynastic and Old Kingdom until the first intermediate period of the Pharaonic culture. And our side, Balat, it falls to the early 4th dynasty, which is more or less the time when the Great Pyramids in Giza have been built. And the other side, which is just neighboring to it, the Pharaonic population called today Ain Azil, it's around 200 years later, so there's no direct interaction between those both sides at Balat. Sheikh Muftar is basing only on the ceramic. It's very difficult to date because it doesn't change. For roughly 2,000 years, it stays more or less the same. There is a style which is called the early Sheikh Muftar style, which is only found from the oasis and not from outside. So it's a question if it's something regional, is it something only typological, or it's really a chronological element. There's something which our Canadian colleagues defined, or Australian, sorry, and they call it the terminal Sheikh Muftach. It's a term I really don't like, I have to say. It sounds not very friendly. So I stay personally with the late Sheikh Muftach for this. And on the other side, we were able to take a lot of C14 samples, as other sites also do, from the surrounding of Dakhla oasis, but it's a bit difficult because we have the plateau, and especially in these times, and the C14 calibration curves. So you can't really date between the 2nd and 4th dynasty, which makes it extremely difficult to put things in relation. So the only good thing how to date Sheikh Muftach is unfortunately still remaining the pharaonic Egyptian ceramics. So if you have contacts, it's fine. If you don't have contacts or only small sites, you kind of can say Sheikh Muftach and that's it. It has been just shortly already explained, there has been the arification starts during the Holocene period in the Eastern Sahara, which is unfortunately still not finished today. And the Western Desert was a very favorable place to stay until roughly the mid-6th millennia, around 5,300 something happening, and we don't have any summer rains anymore. So this leads really to the aridification as we know today in the desert as we have, which of course people and animals moving to the Nile Valley or to the oasis. And Sheikh Muftach falls in the time when the desert region was already most of the time not really favorable anymore, which is why in the previous research it usually has been labeled as mobile, as a reaction to the climate change. But this is something we would like to challenge with our works there, and I would like to rediscuss at least. It has been in the frame of another nomadic conference in last autumn. I shortly addressed this, and I can't stop thinking about this, I have to say, to ask myself, what is truly nomadic and how do I define it within the Sheikh Muftach? I can't answer it. It's easier to answer what Sheikh Muftach is not. It's not urban, it's not complex society. It doesn't have large cemeteries, but it's also not a mobile, small society with moves and seasonal rhythms. So it's something in between. And I recently read the term part-time nomadism in a completely different context, but I like it a lot. And I think personally at the moment I would address Sheikh Muftach to this. On a general scale of mobility and spatial movements, still there, of course, the work what Heiko Riemer did in 2011 is still what we would follow and shows that you have different zones. So first would be the Dakhla oasis where people stay, then you have temporary or seasonal camps in just the outskirts, maybe 30, 50 kilometers away from this, and which has been frequently visited. Then you have in a larger range further stops, let's say maybe around 100 kilometers around the desert, around the oasis, which might be more or less frequently or regularly visited. Let it be for risk minimizing. For example, you want to, you have bad years in the oasis, so you prefer to herd outside and for this kind of stuff. And then you, of course, you have the long distance travels. And of course, as further as you go away from the oasis, as less people you take with me. So you might have a high degree of mobility, but it only might refer to singular individual persons or to subgroups like young men, like maybe older woman, who knows, but possibly not to complete households, and especially not to the complete community on the site. These ideas of mobility, of course, they are very strongly connected with the question of subsistence, and Sheikh Muftach has been always connected with cattle herding. This is because cattle herding is known in the Western deserts since I think around the first 6,000 is the first evidence. And also in the later pharaonic times, cattle herding was very, very popular. From the Sheikh Muftach, there used to be only very few finds, but it was some cattle bones with them. Now we have this very huge animal bones assemblage from Balad. More than, I never can read this without my glasses, sorry, more than 25,000 animal bone fragments, and only 16 of them could be addressed by Verlet and Seele as possibly from cattle from larger animals. All the others, also the non-identified ones, are from smaller animals. So it's rather possible that there was no cattle herding at all. which doesn't mean it was not in other places in the oasis, but it's quite unlikely. It is, but on the other hand, we can well presume that cattle herding was 100 years before or after very popular. It doesn't mean if you do the sum at one point that you have to stay like this for 2,000 years. You might have gone with the flow. There might be times when your herds have been sick. There might be times when you had different trade opportunities or whatsoever. So I suppose people have adapted. But in terms of mobility and therefore also to use the space and spatial movements, cattle herding, like following with your larger herds to go to different pastures and to different greens, it's possibly not the main motivation. So in the oasis, we have around 70 sites. They are all today close to the fields, which means a lot of lost and not very well accessible today. And except two, the seasonal camp El Karafish at the outskirts, and Balad, they are all not investigated. There has been, no, that's not wrong, that's not correct. There have been not largely excavated. So there have been surveys, and there has been in Mood, which is one with the dotted line in the middle, there has been test branches. But unfortunately then in Mood, the permission was revoked, and then we had a long time, as you might know, where we were not able to work in the Western Desert, and so it is that Mood is still on the state of this and has been published in extensively reports, but not with a full publication yet. Mood dates to the pre-dynastic times, and there might be, or seems to be a continuation from a Sheikh Muftah site into a pharaonic site, and both El Karafish and Balad are contemporary, so it's not impossible that the same people who were in Balad went to El Karafish in spring where they collected bird eggs, and or the other way around. So in Balad must have been when you came from the desert, especially when you came from the Nile Valley, it was the first nice spot when you entered the oasis. It's where the trek from the Nile Valley arrives. So you have here, we have an area here full of wells, which were at least some active in this time according to the surface sherds. And so we can imagine it was very green, very nourished, it was kind of even, so it was not very exposed to the wind. We have evidence of a lot of plants, we have a lot of grass evidence, and also larger trees. The site by itself is quite well preserved. It is at least 4,500 square meters large, which is the largest site in the oasis. There are maybe 2 or 3 kind of same size, but they're multi-period ones. We don't really know how large the Sheikh Muftah population was. So it's really a huge residential camp, only inhabited for a shorter while, let's say maybe 30, 40, 50 years, something like this. And then presumably the whole area was exploited and people moved the whole camp elsewhere and never came back. Of the better preserved part, we excavated a good deal. From the eroded part of the edges, we made only some test trenches. And I hope you can see this gray spots. It's what I called the zones of occupation, which is from the surface mapping. So it's always when you put the features together, we had some little mounds there, fireplaces, concentration of animal bones and so forth. Well, the mounds turned out to be just sand, sand dunes which are trapped by bushes and plants, so they had nothing to do with this. But the combination of the fireplaces and animal bones were a good indication for the campsites. These zones, usually as shown by excavation, usually contained 1 or more camps. So it's actually like a cluster of camps, which, also during the development, most of the zones kept to be inhabited all the time. So as you see here, it's a relationship between 2 zones. It starts a bit slowly, but then both was contemporary in use all the time. Or you would see it in this way here with the different subphases here, mainly in zone 1. So, but you also see they're very close to each other. There's not much space in between, while there's maybe the 5 to 10 meters between the zones, between the main concentrations. So this is at least nice that the surface impression doesn't give us a completely wrong idea of the whole site. What is much more difficult is to say what is truly contemporary or not. As I said, we have, when people came, there was a lot of grass. So we have, before the Sheikh Muftah, we have a very quick, very huge, massive accumulation of sand layers. Now people stay, and it all got destroyed in a rather short time, I have to say. So we start to have more and more depletion. Yeah, also the grass was the grass cover was possibly destroyed, so it was not holding back the sand anymore. I guess trees had been cut for fires and so forth. So as more the Sheikh Muftah camp develops, as less sedimentation process we have and as more deflation we have, especially when it gets windy. And which is why we can only give kind of frames to say within these frames we have camp 4 and 5 contemporary or whatever, but we can't really say if there's a seasonal rhythm, if there's somebody stayed for a couple of years here, or if it is really all inhabited at the very same moment, unfortunately. The only thing we can say, thanks to the animal bones, I've forgotten to mention, is that people were present there for the full year because we have bones of all age groups there. We have one feature we interpret as a dwelling pit, as the only one which would be a kind of hut, which has a tradition in the Western Desert. It's nothing very new, and which would be in reconstruction by the feature would be something very light construction. It was very nice of it because it burned down, and so we have really the proof that it had a cover, that it was the proof that it had a roof. We also know where the entrance was, and that the sides were also closed. Of course, we don't know how dense it was. This could also happen on all the other camps, but if it's not burned down, it's very difficult to detect. Also, as being burned down, we have everything in situ. We have plenty of fireplaces where you have the cooking vessel still in situ, next to it a grinding stone. And we have, for a small pit like this, it's 6 meter in diameter, we have quite a lot of fireplaces. I think there's 1 large one and 7 small ones in the late state. With this accumulation of fireplaces we have in all the camps, it's something which we figured out immediately, that's the definition. So this is, for example, camp number 2 in an early state. You see it to the west. Everything is kind of a fireplace area. We have some main fire spots, and the main fire spots were not used for cooking. You find only the cooking vessels on the small fire spots, and also the animal bones are usually not coming from the main fireplaces. So this was something more to keep the fire. What we understood from the dwelling pit and also from other sites is that the small fireplaces, people cook individually, and also they have their grinding stone next to it. And all these small fireplaces used to be used at the same moment, which also means it's not for a small family like mother, father, 3 children, it's for a larger community, for a larger group. I call this group household. It's only referring to one camp, and since I can't really say who is consisting of this, but it was, I guess, either they had a very complex menu, which would be nice for them, or there were a couple of persons which used the same spots. And then to the east, you see there's a clean spot, and where people could maybe dwell, where they could have some activities. But during the use of this, usually in all the camps, you have a development, everything became very ashy, fireplaces moved to what we call camp. Is therefore very well definable because we have the ashy substrata, and it's more like a kitchen area actually than a camp, all in all together. However, all these kitchens have been used for many things. So on the left one, you see again the situation with the main fire spot in the center, and the small ones here with a cooking vessel still in situ on it. And on the right one, you see all the grinding stones which have been found next to the small fireplaces and together with the vessels. Oops, sorry. And here on the right one, you have other stone tools, which were maybe for crushing bones, or others which were more found to the northern edge and away from the fireplaces, but also a lot of other tools implying different activities which were found around the fireplaces, like stone knappings and other things. So this dwelling pit was continuously used without a break, but we had 4 better, let's say, floors, so better phases to define. And thanks to the sieving, but also thanks to the great fact that we had somebody who did the residue analysis on the flintstones, we had quite a good insight into the activity who took place. Of course, in the earlier phase, it's less well preserved than in the final phase, but usually you have here, with the greenish ones, you have evidence of slaughtering to the north, and you possibly also skin working. We also found the remains of 2 poor foxes which have been skinned there. You have here next to the cooking, you have different activities which can move, like for example, people worked with ochre and did something with it. We have, as I said, the stone knappings, the produced tools on the spot, but only what they needed. And we have also proven tools used on something which was mineral, which is most likely ceramic, and also things which I don't understand what it is. It's an accumulation of small sandstone splits which just appear somewhere. And the western half, next to the entrance, it was always the storage area because we have the storage installations there. These are kind of clayish rings or pits, which protect the vessels which are supposedly stored in this. We didn't found this in situ, we found it next to it, but it fits perfectly. So in these kind of clusters, you find in some camps, so for example, here we have the remains again of this storage rings, and here this was a part of a small pit, which was had a clay cover and could have been used also to prepare something, or you could have a vessel with it. Next to it was a grinding stone, and then you have here some parts which are more kept free of ashes. Or here in this camp, it has repeatedly the same development of features. We have several fireplaces developing here on each other on larger ashy soils. And here in the last state also a pit has been dug in, with also a grinding stone next to it. And here we also have the remains of replacing mud rings to store the vessels. So this is of course, something which doesn't develop in a short time, and it's really something where people either stayed all the time, or at least a part of a household stayed all the time, and all the rest of the people came back. And also Camp 4 was kind of nice because of the find distribution. Now we have here the finds which are related more to food processing, grinding things, most likely, or smashing things. And then those which are more clearly related to craftwork, like the whetstone or some hammer stones, and this might be unfinished lit for stone vessel, they come from further away. So there's also a little bit of spatial distribution to keep things clean. Normally the wind comes from the north, so this, which is I guess why that most of the fireplaces tend to be more south, which is kind of logical. In kinds of dwelling structures, it was difficult because you have a very sandy substrata, and they didn't have post holes pits. So they rammed in the poles immediately, which is not very easy then to detect. So we have them, like in this cases, when they cut other structures, or this one, they were burned down. So we had the burnt impression of them, but they even got lost after 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters. So it was not very easy to find. And here, I don't know, I hope you can see the difference. The one which are in lighter, or these are, we're not even really sure if they're post holes or if I imagine them. They are here between two camps, and they don't give a real structure. Maybe it was something fence-like, something, or a shelter, because even if you have trees in a climate like this, you need to have a shelter for the sun, but also for the wind, which is usually very strong. So when it comes to the distribution of a spatial distribution of activities, what I have shown you from the dwelling pit with the development, it was very easy in a certain way because it was very well protected as it was in this pit and not exposed to the soils and the wind. And also the results for the residue analysis were therefore much better. On a larger scale from the surface, I mean, we sieved and counted and plotted so much, and it didn't give any better impression than what you already have with your eye to see here's a lot and here is less. And this is a lot and this is less refers in a little bit also to the process of erosion, I realized. Because so you have more stuff, of course, where the part is better erosion, and then when you come to the areas which are more eroded, you tend to have only smaller finds. Nonetheless, it shows what we don't have. We don't have large workshops. We don't have large working chains or something. We don't have distribution of work. Each household is an independent unit, despite the fact that they're so close to each other. They are not kind of connected like a main household and then some economic or whatever satellites around this. They are all independent and all have the same finds. There's very little indication of things you might think, okay, it's a residential camp, it's maybe a base camp, so people should prepare for the long distance travels, for hunting or whatever, all these theoretical sort and concept you have. There's nothing like this. These are all the evidence we have for the production of ostrich elk shell beads, which are, as you see, only 7 half-finished products, that's all. Which is also surprisingly little for a place like this, but we only found a higher number of beads, so there might have been just bad luck that we didn't get this. In terms of other activities, the residue analysis on the flint tools shows different contact material like the wood, like the hard stones, working on bones, having the contact with the ceramics and stuff. It's usually, it ends up as being multifunctional, and it's also not related to specific tool types. The only difference or the only exception are the drillers, which are related to the contact with the ceramic, drilling in ceramic, and which made me in the first moment very excited, because you may know that there are this enigmatic Clayton rings and discs in the Western Desert this year, which are also related to Sheikh Muftah, and I thought we have a production place like this. But in the end, I had to realize, no, we don't have. We have 10 of these discs, which is more or less the same number we have also in the palace, and half of them comes from the surface, so it's just something which is there, but it's not produced there, unlike in El Karafish, for example, where you have also the half-finished products. So it's more likely that the drillers are actually to repair the ceramic, because most of the vessels need, because the quality is not very good, repair holes, which also explains why they have been found next to the fireplaces, most of them. So it belongs also to the cooking part. Otherwise, there's in spatial distribution, there's nothing specific about the other tools, which is also because they're very difficult to classify in the way as they are. They are not standardized. Most of them are non-formal and very opportunistic. And what is more surprisingly, there is also no difference between our site and the other sites. Well, in the Oasis, you could expect, okay, more or less the same. But El Karafish, which is really a seasonal camp and really a specific hunting camp, you could think there should be a difference, but it's also not. The only difference comes by the system of classification we all use, but if you take this out, it's always the same. So Sheikh Muftah seems to be and stays like for 2,000 years all in all, or at least for the last 100 of years where we have more information, pretty much the same, which is an impression which I think it's very wrong, because it's only basing on the very, very little insights we have because of the restricted material culture. And as pragmatic as it is, it also means everything can be used in a very different way. So I wouldn't think there is a big cultural concept or behavior behind it, also when it comes to the question of nomadism, but it's rather going with the flow. It is more, okay, these are dry years, these are less drier years, we go maybe more out, we stay maybe more in the desert, in the oasis, sorry. I don't think we have a high mobility of people roaming seasonally with kettles, even in earlier times when they have kettles. I think more you have these residential camps, and from these residential camps, certain people might move for specific reasons. And within these residential camps, we have quite a high amount of people which could be there at the same time. It's very easy to say where people cooked. I've shown you this. It's very difficult to say where to sleep. There is some space around the fireplaces, but all usually grow into something ashy. And you can, of course, sleep there, but you don't have to by the end of the day. There is a theory that places which are rather empty of finds might have been used for sleeping, that people tend to keep their sleeping area free. Not to sleep on stones and whatever, which might kind of make sense. And then you might have either between the zones for smaller sleeping groups, or larger ones maybe staying further here to the side, which is in parts covered by sand today, but also which are completely free of features. Also there is some Sheikh Muftah ceramic flying around. There's also no evidence of an inner, let's say, village structure like other places have. There is no evidence, which is also very strange, for animal keeping on the site. We don't have the preservation for dung pellets, which would be, of course, the best evidence, but we also have no pens or anything. And I'm sure they must have something to stay safe there, of course, during the nights and to keep the animals safe. So where to cook and where to sleep, we can only answer this so far to 50%. And where to sleep, we will hopefully figure out in the nearer future. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Clara, for this very impressive data and talk. We have time for a few questions before the general discussion. Is there any question in the room or in Zoom? I have some. So I will start. First, I have one question. Do you see any direct connection between the Sheikh Muftah camp and the Egyptian nearby settlement or not? And what kind of connection, if you have this?
Yes, there's always a certain interaction. We have a small amount, but a certain amount of imported ceramics in Egyptian style, in parts made in the Nile Valley, but the majority is made in the oasis. So, I mean, Ain Asil is dating later. So this was not the direct neighbor at this time, but in Moot, for example, which is like 1 day travel away, there would be another site, and I'm sure there has been other ones. This is also the place where people came from the Nile Valley, so the pharaonic expedition are likely to pass by at least. We also have, and this is one of our largest small find groups, are seals. Of course, all are not stamped, but at least they traded something in which was sealed. We have no cereals on the other hand, so that was not an interaction like this. And there's also the other way around in the pharaonic population. We see afterwards in the material culture very little what reminds you on Sheikh Muftah. So there was contact, but it didn't make in the archaeological material not a lot of impression. Maybe in names, stories or whatever, but not on this what we can figure out.
Okay, thank you. Is there, okay. There is a question in the room.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. So my background is in cultural anthropology, and I was wondering the assumption you would make since there was no animal bones found in this area, what did you assume for this culture and their practices? Will you just assume that they weren't practicing their like animal keeping, or what inferences would you make from being there?
Sorry, I think I jumped completely over this point, but I was only referring to what cattle, there's no cattle keeping, but there was a lot of hunting of gazelles and the keeping of caprines, mainly goats. It's more or less 50-50, so it's neither hunting really dominated nor animal herding dominated. In the hunting, on the other hand, it's like a bit like food delivery because you're close to the wells, so the animals pass by. It's, I guess, one of the reasons why you like to stay in this part.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions there? No, is there any question on Zoom? Okay. Yeah.
May I?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Clara, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, which is, so multifaceted. And it's not a question what I have, but, what I really like to think more in this household way. I think this is really helpful also for, what I see maybe up there in the Eastern America. And what you said, that it's not a clear cut. They did, they decided to do this, moved on and did then that, so that it was not a clear-cut decision, but more, I think you described it very well, this kind of intensities, like these flows or growing degrees. So I think I have to look much more into this work on Sheikh Muftah. So thank you very much, and you raised issues which are very well comparable. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is one question in the chat, but I think it's quite difficult one and quite tricky one, because you would have to be also specialized in Arabic pre-Islamic poems. Are there any similarities between your finds and the things that are mentioned in Arabic pre-Islamic poems, like the premises of the Romantic poems? So it might be a tricky question.
I have no idea, but I would like to think that Sheikh Muftah left some traces also in this kind of poems. Yeah.
Is there other questions? I have one more. The tools you show us can be quite big, I think, the stone tools. Is there anything during your research about just your Muftah or the other site that make you think and make you have an idea of when is it better to take the tool with you, or just to leave it there and to make another one in the other camp? Or
you mean now the flint?
Yeah, the flint tools and the macrolithic tools you have for cooking, for smashing.
The macrolithic tools are all made from the local material, which is available
Perfect.
Unlike the pharaonic one, which went at least 3 kilometers. For the flint, it's half and half. Half of them is produced on site, which is also which you find in the ancient channels, the raw materials, the pebbles washed down from the plateau, and half is brought. This also we have later in the palace, because rather large, you have this tabular sherds, which is naturally splitted by the heat, and it's very regular. So one step in the production of the tool. Perfect. You have to find. And it's not now in Dakhla Oasis, and the nearest outcrops are around 100 kilometers away. So it's quite a way to go. And in the palace, it's very similar, homogeneous material. So I suppose they go to one area. Okay. Like Sheikh, and also you have the production in the palace later. In the Sheikh Muftah, people come with a range in different shades and quality. So people bring it. They're usually the small ones, or the large, very beautiful ones, I have to say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Julian, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was amazing. Apologies if I didn't understand this, but what is the relation of the camps to water sources? Is it in this period there would have been some surface water near the sites, or would they have had to drive animals to an artificial cistern, or yeah?
No, there are water springs close by. 50 meters west of this, and there are several ones. So some of them were active in this time and some are not. And these moved over the centuries further and further away. And also when people went like for the space camp, there was artificial water ponds, which was then collected during the winter. So people used these kind of things which were still known from the area. It was a little bit wettish, more wettish than today. But yes, it gives you some opportunities, but there is no indication of water transport or having like water stations or things like this, nothing. I don't think you can do it in the ceramic.
Just to make a follow-up question, is if one makes an inference of transhumance and movement between camps, is that based on the water sources being extinguishable so that they would run out after a while and have to move to another camp, or is it?
Well, according to the surface finds, it looks like for the Old Kingdom, at least until then also, and later in the Pharaonic time, at least until the Second Intermediate period, we are quite good with water in Balad. For the other sites in the Oasis, I can't say, but the sites today are usually found where today are wells known in the fields. Now, by now, since electrification, you don't have this wells that much anymore, of course, in the Oasis, because the groundwater table is falling, but there must have been much, much more in ancient times and also in modern times until the 70s. And then it's maybe not the water, it's maybe more the exploitation about the area around, especially if you're herding. So maybe the pasture green, which is immediately next door, is gone. You could also maybe collect wild plants or something. So I suppose in a quite tender environment like this, after 1-2 generations, you have made quite an impact. So you have to move on. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
So Marie has a question also.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I have to say I'm very impressed by the level of details you can have on your site. My question is quite linked to what Mel was asking. You said so that you have a little bit of mobility, maybe for cattle herding. Do you know what kind of material tools they brought with them during this mobility, during this traveling with cattle, or did you find some kind of tool around the site? I don't know what distance, but...
No, and it's not cattle herding, it's goat keeping in our...
Goat keeping, okay, sorry.
Sorry. We have two cattle bones actually, and these are also both tools made from bones. Which is, so this is something also which is very strange that they didn't do this, but it's something possibly which might have been collected elsewhere. And generally speaking, Sheikh Muftah was good in collecting things, so they reused a lot of old tools, also a lot of old grinding stones apparently, as it looks like that they come from previous cultures or groups in the area and stuff. And then we have this interaction a little bit with the Pharaonic group, and we also have fish from the Nile Valley, which has been brought somehow. But we don't know if the contact is direct or if it is via another Pharaonic population, for example. So we don't, also with this, I can't say how far it actually reaches, or if items are traveling or if people are traveling.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Is there any other question for Clara? If there is not, we can go to a wider discussion with question about both talks and about mobility and nomadism in general. Is there any question so for Clara? Any last question? No? Okay. So is there any question or remarks more generally about the spatial organization of nomads and semi-nomads? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for your very interesting presentations. As someone who doesn't know anything about nomads or almost, and this has been a little bit discussed through the last questions that have been asked to you, Clara, but I was wondering how you can know and define what was brought by populations, by nomadic populations with them, what they left on site, what they found when they went back to a previous site, and what they reuse and so on. So maybe this can be answered by both you and Katharina.
Well, it depends on the material we know from the region, because it's exploited, of course, in many periods. So you have a certain idea of the stones and where it's available and stuff like this. And so exotic things, they stand out immediately. And with the grinding stones, because they look very much like Beshendi, what is known from the Beshendi group, and they are extremely carefully made. And some people may say that Sheikh Muftah was not very good in making things very carefully. So this is why it's an idea, it's maybe somewhere picked up and used again. Maybe it was just next door and they came back to the same site. Then sometimes you have, of course, production debris. And sometimes in some cases, I could refit really things from the same core and say, okay, this really belongs together. It was made here on this very spot. And sometimes you see that, especially larger stones, I don't think you move them a lot. You don't bring them once to the side, but maybe you give up your camp and then your neighbor comes and say, very nice, I take this. So things wander maybe a little bit with this, and all we always have is in the very last stage we have it. And then, of course, the things like from the pharaonic culture, which are very, very clear. And we also did some petrographic analysis on the ceramics. So this helped a lot to see what is really locally made, which comes from Praga, which possibly comes from Bakharia, which comes from the Nile Valley. This is nothing I can say. It's very own.
Okay, maybe I add something. So, you know, in our region, it's the pottery, which is clearly locally made. So you see that it is the clay from the area, and then I had this material which was also produced on spot, not in the kilns in the north. But then, of course, like in all cases, it becomes difficult when, the fabric is so close to what in the Mareotis region is made. So then it's not the material, but the form. So there's one special form which is locally made. And then you see, what if this locally made amphora is traveling down to Siwa or not. So this is, it's tiny bits and pieces which tell you that this material is local or moves, or then again we have the distances, how far it moves. And again, I think I find very nice what Clara said, this thinking very much more practical, let's say. So if there's anything you can use it, and of course then we do not know who used it, but be open for pragmatic solutions on spot.
Thank you. So regarding a more general question, I have a question, in fact, 3 remarks or questions for both of you. First, do you think it's possible to have any idea now or in the future of the kind of the number of people in this kind of areas? Because it's really difficult to have an idea. Do you have any idea, any clue of how we can deal with it to have better idea of the nomadic population during ancient time, which is tricky because it's even impossible today to have an exact idea of the nomadic population. The second question is, as you told us, Clara, there is a big problem of deflation, of wind deflation, wind erosion, which is taking away the archaeological layer almost everywhere. So do you think it's still possible to find camp with stratigraphy in more desertic area, far from the oasis or not? In your experience of the field, you have both a wide experience of the field in Egypt, so I think if somebody can answer that, it's probably one of you or both of you. And the last question is, finally, most of the time with nomadic people, we can, or semi-nomadic people, we can see some burials, but even for the Shir Mufta, so it's not something that you can see. But the camp are the thing we almost always miss. And so as you have one camp, Clara, do you think that this camp is something very specific to the oasis, or something that can work also in other parts of the desert, and something that we can imagine as kind of model camp, or is it too specific because it's from the oasis? And the last question is kind of the same, but more for Katharina. If I understand well, you don't have any, don't have any, but very few camp. And if I saw well on the maps, it's all in the north. Do you think that the other one just disappeared, or that you just did not find it yet because you will have to find only some potholes? And when you don't know how to start, it's difficult. So 3 main questions: number of people there, can we still find camp in more desertic area, or if not, can we use the camp from the oasis and, as a model or not? And the last one, how to detect the camp, in fact, in the desert, if they are still existing only in the form of deflated sites. So I don't know which one of you want to go first.
Should I start? Okay, I just start. Yeah, thank you for again very good questions. So numbers of people, of course, very difficult, and this ties into the second question. I would count camps and drop sites of things, which of course are not, you cannot find it if not by chance. What of course, in numbers of people doing this kind of mixed life strategies, we have of course carrying capacities of the fields. So for, I don't know, the 2nd millennium BCE, we could, date more fields and have then carry a number of people counted on base of the carrying capacity, so crops, grown crops. Preservation is not so much a problem, but of course, destruction. So it's not deflation, but destruction by human beings, and this makes it impossible to be sure, to have a kind of, we do not know what ratio we have from what was there in I don't know, Greco-Roman times. And your question about how to detect those camps, which would help us, or shelters, whatever, drop sites, which would help us to know how many people roamed across the plateau. It is, we had like 2 in the south, which were just by chance because you just walk out. But this is so vast, and you do not have any. Of course, you would start from the roads, from the tracks we reconstructed, and then let's say go into 5, 10, 20 kilometers ranges. But you need, I don't know how many people and how much time to find 3. So this is, I would always do it, but no one finances this.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, as for the number of people, I would like to know if I'm correct to think this is one residential camp at a time, at least in one part of the oasis, where oasis is like 80 kilometers long. So this is very difficult to judge by this. Yeah. I think completely out of the I would never publish, but I think maybe a couple of 100 people could live at the same time at Balad. It's large enough for this, which is a big population. And I don't think that many, much more Sheikh Muftah people were in the oasis. So I think it's more you have like Sheikh Muftah mega camp cities. somewhere and then smaller groups around.
Okay.
And this is something you would obviously not find in the desert, because you need for that bigger amount of people, you need the water access and you need the pasture grass for the animals. But you may find in the desert more, and also from the previous time when it was more favorable. I think it's not too difficult in the term of preservation and inflation, because it's rather rocky, and it's so in this air parts, of course, it's often sheltered, and it's even you have maybe more sand accumulations and it's gone by this. But it's in the more open area, it's also difficult to spot. But I also don't think people would have stayed there, possibly more where it's more protected in a certain way. And what was the third question? Sorry.
The third question was, do you think that this kind of camp you have in the Oasis can be used as a kind of a model to imagine or to start a study of camp in the desert? Or do you think that the fact that it is in the Oasis with a lot of wells, there a quite long occupation for this kind of camp?
I'm not really sure if it's kind of model, but I mean, for myself, coming from a background from European archaeology, it has clashed all my ideas of models, which I had from Mesolithic Neolithic times. So when I realized how much I have to change my way of thinking and adapt it to the Egyptian environment or to the desert environment, how things could have been working, what to expect for. And for me, it was very eye-opening and to work in these details with this. And therefore, of course, it's helpful also for the desert region.
Okay, thank you very much. There is one question in the chat. Can there be other factors from migration other than climatic or natural factors, like, for example, civil strife or tribal wars? Are there any finds indicated those human or political factors? I can just say that we have proof of that, for example, in the 17th and 18th century AD, with Maza people from the north of the Arabian Peninsula, because they went from the North Arabian Peninsula to the north of the eastern desert of Egypt because of too many problems of tension with other tribes and clans in this area, which were linked also with an overexploitation, overgrazing, and over-burning of the acacia in this area. And so they went from one side of the Red Sea to the other, not directly because of the environment, but because of the social consequences of an overexploitation of the environment by all the tribes in the area. Do you have any clue for conflict in your sites or this kind of thing, or not?
No.
In our case, it's not so much conflict, but again, very, this high impacts of socio-political changes, which starting from the 6th century, 7th century, 8th century, the economic system of the entire Eastern Mediterranean changed. And so, what we do not see conflict, but people became invisible. This might be that they, left, moved east, west, south, and adapted again to be more, living on camels or whatever. But it's a question of like less numbers or invisible evidence. But it is the change of the socioeconomic larger network.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree to this. It's more this process of changing and assimilation or adaptation is still also quite difficult for us to understand. And we just see something is missing eventually, some group was missing, but we don't know exactly what happened. But there's also no indication for a large murder or war field or whatsoever.
Thank you very much. Julian, you have a question?
Yes, this is a slightly difficult question to ask maybe. I think both of your presentations and your particular data showed case studies of possible pastoralists or nomads, if we want to call them, that we're not really sure how nomadic they were because of various environmental factors. In both cases, you have lots of agriculture in both these sites. And my sort of difficult question is, do you think scholars in nomadic studies, be it archaeology or anthropology or any other allied field, spend too much time thinking about these types of nomadism? in terms of movement rather than describing their specific case study? Do they always want to make it fit in categories? And I'm happy if I were you to take that question.
Well, I think we need far more case studies to. I mean, that's what I was just saying. It's clear the models don't really work, and it's also good to address this and to say, but what does it mean to be nomadic in this case? But we never really find answers, and it's maybe better for Anna Katarina because she has a larger region, and so she sees that you can find out more tendency or developments. But yes, I think you need a high amount of validated sites to put things into relation to each other, and this is a long-term research.
Again, also this is really, can only base on more of those like regional studies or place-related studies, which again, is important also if you study nomadism or mobile lifestyles. I would still say that the word nomad is too easily like given to anybody, and I'm not a linguist or a philologist, so but I think working with, and I will join the next seminars, working with philologists, linguists, anthropologists is helpful because the self definition of people having a mobile lifestyle, which helps maybe to understand how they relate to others, how they relate to environment, how they relate to their products. And there were interesting ones, when you had the seminar in our conference in November. So enlarging, if we study the desert, enlarging our perspective onto wetlands, onto mountain nomadism, and so on. You mentioned transhumance. So all these labels are helpful, and I think we speak still of nomadism, but for example, like part-time nomadism. I like what you said, Clara. I'm always doubting semi-nomadism. No one would have called him or herself a semi-nomad. So we always have to be clear that this is a label we give. Yeah, and then it's fine. We can speak of whatever we want if we say this is what but we, as archaeologists and anthropologists, of course, it's so much better and interesting because it's what we saw. It's so complex, and one campsite is so full of information to depart from this, and then to say it might have been like this or like that. And try to compare it. I'm really going now deeper into Sheikh Muftagh, because on what criteria we can compare. Because if there is mobility, if there's this contact to those living in the oasis, so I think how to compare is then the difficult question. Was not really an answer to your question, but nevertheless,
it was a question that never had an answer that would satisfy the question. So that was deliberate. Yeah, no, I take both your points. It's a field where a lot of labels are used, sometimes without thought, which is the background to my question. But it is something that we can't run away from. And I think it's an easy call to call many societies semi-nomadic, because that covers all your bases. And then one way around that, of course, is agropastoralism. But then when people decide to be agropastoralists and when they're not agropastoralists, when is an agropastoralist a nomadic pastoralist, is all the sorts of tongue-twisting problems that one gets themselves into. The other question I had, if we have time, Maël.
Yeah, we still have time.
Okay. Is the element to which you would use ethnography to fill in the gaps in the archaeological record, especially in, I think, both these case studies, in that we don't have what I would say explicit geographies. Maybe, Katarina, you do in your case study of Greco-Roman authors describing Libyan nomadism, but no Egyptian is describing Sheikh Muftagh nomadism in the second millennium, third millennium BC, and so forth. And I was wondering, to what element do you use it, or do you think it's a trap, or yeah?
Sorry, I didn't really understood.
Oh, sorry. The element to which you would use modern ethnographic parallels to fill in the data on the archaeological record for how people move, how people use dwellings, and things like this.
it helped me to understand what is needed, even if it's not really for the Sheikh Muftah, but when I read studies about how modern nomad societies are moving and how big a tent is, it has to fit into 4 pickups or something like this. And so I was thinking, okay, how can this, what kind of animals did they have, what can we presume, and things like this. So it is, for me, being archaeologist, it's super enriching to read this kind of studies. I learned a lot. I learned also a lot about history of Africa in the last 200 years. I didn't know that cattle herding is something rather new here as we know today in this kind of things. And it shaped all the things which shape our underlying understanding of things. So, but I would never put it one by one. That would not help. It only shows a kind of possibility, but in the end you find for everything a study, like for the example, the organization of sleeping groups. It is, everything is possible, like, and you find a very well example for everything. I think you need far more textual evidence and description, even if it's from a different group, but unfortunately it's never mentioning the pharaonic text about this group something. That would be helpful. Huh?
Yeah.
Yes, what I can answer is ethnography in the proper sense of the word was used for, you know, checking this northern Libyan desert ware and how far it was still, you know, made. And it turned out that still in the 1960s it was produced, and you know, to cover this in a more broader sense of handmade pottery in the, let's say, Eastern Sahara. So this is a proper, you know, the pottery specialist did it. But then using Greco-Roman ethnography is not, you know, either difficult or impossible, because it's all the nomadic topos which you have to kind of brim out, and then. It's very, of course, little, and it's far more west, or it's the Nile Valley, so it's nothing on those people, and again, it's helpful, it's useful. I read this Retai on the Sahel zone, so to think in analogies. But of course, not falling into the trap that if you like, you find everywhere, you know, things which seem to be exactly like you found it. But for opening the mind, of course, I think we should. If you are doing nomadism in archaeology, you need to read anthropological literature, and then again to be very kind of the critical reading and be careful with the analogies. But it helps.
Thank you.
Is there any last question or remarks before we conclude this seminar in 1 or 2 minutes? You have to go, Katharina?
I leave. I'm sorry. I thank you so much. Finish in your time. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you, Katharina.
See you soon. So there is Corinne Castel, I think, on Zoom. We don't hear you, Corinne. Your mic is perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really interesting discussion. I'm especially interested because I worked for many years in Syria, in arid margins of Syria, as we say. And I think ethnography is always very, very useful. And we used it a lot for our works. We worked in a region which was certainly during the 3rd millennium BC, which has a mean rainfall of around 200 millimeters with high variability, as always, and in a city. So it's really interesting because we couldn't imagine before that we had a city in such an environment, and for the 3rd millennium BC. And what ethnography learned to me, to answer you, Maël, is that there can be changing of status, if we can say that, because it doesn't mean really a very precise thing. If you are more nomadic or more nomad or more sedentary, depending on the dry years, more dry years, the people can change of mobility. Also, depending on the age of the people. If they are young, they are more mobile than when they are old. And also, we discovered, discussing a lot with ethnographers, specialists of modern times, that a part of population can be sedentary and another part can be more or less mobile depending on the rain of the year. So there is a whole variety of mobility or of way of lives, and completely entangled in the same area. And the people who with who I discussed and we worked together were people working in the Palmyra region, Tadmor, the ancient Tadmor and Palmyra region. And the site where we worked with my team was El Rauda in central Syria. So I think ethnography is always very, very important to realize how more complicated it is than what we usually think when we are sedentary and living in urban contexts, of course, and in modern times. Thank you. And thank you very much for this discussion, which were really interesting.
Thank you, Corinne. I think also if we just think again about the Maza, I'm sorry, I really, I'm in touch with a lot of Maza Bedouin, with many of them. It's very interesting because Joseph Hobbs, a geographer, worked with them in the 1980s, and he was telling the same kind of thing. In fact, an individual can be nomad in some part of his life, can be sedentary, can stay at the same place at another part of his life, especially when they are growing old. And in the last 30 or 50 years, something in between, probably mainly the last 30 years, more and more Mazas just settled in Hurghada, but they are still living in Maza neighborhood on the margin, on the north margin of Hurghada, not mixed with the rest of the population. They have their neighborhood, their buildings. We sometimes try to have the same organization in the flat than they would have in the tent or hut, which is really funny, in fact. And women and children all stayed in Hurghada. Some of the men stayed in Hurghada, but some other men, mostly some between 40 and 50 years, and some teenagers, are still going to the desert to take care of the herds and to do all the things linked with pastoralism and at the same time with gold exploitation of the desert, because nowadays it's not the pastoralism which is the most valuable thing for the Bedouins. It's much better for them to just sell the right to people to use the gold in their area, which are their traditional pastures. But I think this kind of very, very short process, because it happened in less than 30 years, are something we can have in mind, for example, to compare with the Shir Mufta and this kind of thing. And you're right, Corinne, it's not categories, in fact, it's a kind of a continuum, and at the scale of the society, but also at the scale of the individual. So, yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I will conclude in a few words, just to tell you that we plan, so as Marie told you before, 3 webinars every year and a workshop in presence every year, if we find enough money for that, but we will try to. We are really happy to have shared this time with you all. Thanks again to the FAO, thanks again to Clara and Katharina. And really, I hope that we will have many more discussions like that, because as you saw today, I think when you are making people from different fields discussing together about different periods with different scales, time scales, different space scales, like that, we start to go further about nomads. And I think it's really a way that we can use to improve our knowledge of nomads and nomadism a long time. So thank you very much to everyone, and see you soon, inshallah. Corinne, tu voudrais dire quelque chose ou c'est... Ah non, c'est bon. Merci à toutes et à tous. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Myron. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.